today and how we are going to reshape our towns essentially, and they will have to take all of these things into account. And so I'm a great believer, and I think it is a fact of life that adversity is the biggest driver of change that there is. So we really have to note that. And when you think here we are meeting electronically, almost 100 people today, and that would never have been envisaged even a year ago. So things are moving fast. But anyway, I want to get on with the meeting because we're a little late in starting, and the minutes of the cross-party group that were held on the 9th of September have been in your hands for some time. Are there any, please can I have someone move their adoption? Anybody would just speak up and we'll move their adoption. Right, well, I take it then you're all content then in the absence of anybody saying anything. And are there any matters arising from the minutes of the meeting? And again, a suitable silence as follows, so I assume that there are none. So we'll move on, therefore, to Together Towards Change. And we have an array of speakers today. We have David Cowan, we have Douglas Duff, we have Alan Anthony, and we also have Emma McKenzie, which is absolutely fantastic. And no meeting of this cross-party group, of course, would be complete without Phil Prentice, who is going to kick off. And Phil, who, of course, as you all know, is the Chief Officer of Scotland's Towns Partnership, but he really needs no introduction. So Phil, if you would please kick off and tell us about the topic that we're about to discuss today. Look forward. On you go, Phil.
Thanks very much, convener, and good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well. Together Towards Change. I think the key words there are together and change. COVID's changed everything, how we work, live, socialize, learn, travel, everything. So after a pretty dark and difficult year, it's good that we've got some light as the vaccines begin to get rolled out. So in the meantime, don't drop your guard. Be kind and tolerant. Continue to support your local economy where possible, and in particular, those who need the most help. So whilst COVID's had an unimaginable impact across society, towns and city centres in particular have been hit pretty hard. There's been some key learning. The collaboration, the leadership, the compassion, the fact that no one sector is going to be able to stand alone after we start to move through the recovery phase. So today we are looking at how collaboration across government, local government, private sector, and the social sector is the way forward. And it's great that we've got a strong set of speakers that will actually be able to shine a wee bit more light on that, what we're actually talking about. So set the fiefdoms and the politics to the side. We all need to work together towards change. That's me, short and sweet today. Okay,
thanks, Phil. That's brilliant, and gives us a good basis to start from. I would now like to ask David Cowan, who's the head of the Regeneration Unit in the Scottish Government, to do more scene setting, I suppose. He's been the head of the Scottish Government Regeneration Unit since October 2011 and has been part of overseeing the implementation of the regeneration strategy, including the launch of the delivery of the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, the Empowering Communities Fund, and the Strengthening Communities Programme. So there isn't much that David doesn't know about our subject today, and I would very much like to welcome him. You will also know that there's a chat facility today. Usually we record all of these things that are going on, as you will see. And also, if you want to ask questions and get a chat going in the chat box, then please feel free to do that and put any questions that might occur to you as we go along. David, if you'd like to kick off, please.
Okay, yep, and thank you for that introduction. Yes, I've been head of the Regeneration Unit since the end of 2011. I suppose some would say that's too long. But actually, I think, for the job I've got, it's probably longevity is probably a better thing than not, because it does mean that perhaps you actually can get to that point where you are collaborating and working together. You know the landscape, you know some of the people involved, and actually build up trusted relationships, which I think is vitally important if we're serious about trying to make the transformation that we need. Is that we need to work together. We need to trust each other. We need to recognize that we've all got different things that we're trying to achieve, but ultimately in a place, hopefully they come together to make that place better rather than just our own particular interests. So yeah, and thanks for the invitation to come and speak as well, Phil and co from Scotland's Towns Partnership. So I suppose that looking at the topic, I had to phone up Phil and say, what do you want me to say? So I was kind of scratching my head. It's kind of like, it seems blindingly obvious to me, I guess, but I think it's probably a good time to reinforce the message. And I have to say, I've just come from a meeting of many ministers where we were talking to them about what we're doing around place-based investment and what we're doing about the town centre action plan review. And I couldn't really come here more heartened than what was coming out of that everyone seems to be well signed up for this, recognizing the challenges, but actually, yes, we do need to put place firmly at the heart of the agenda and about how we do that collaborative approach to make the difference that we want to see locally. So I guess what I would say is, going back to very, very quick potted history, obviously, yes, we have a regeneration strategy, and yes, we have the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, but I think for this audience, more importantly, is the Town Centre Action Plan, which was born out of a national review, as you know, of town centres back in 2013. The Scottish Government response was the Town Centre Action Plan. And I think, key to that was firstly, it was a partnership approach and signed up to by both Scottish and local government, but equally, it's a plan that was for everyone. It was about trying to be an enabling plan, Scottish Government providing support and considering national issues where required, but ultimately it's for communities, for local authorities, for the public in the third sector and businesses to take action locally. And that was the strength of the Town Centre Action Plan, and being the strength of our Town Centre First approach, I think, is that it has asked for and required strong partnership working to make it real. And so learning from that, we've done work since, and not just in support of the Town Centre Action Plan and trying to put some national funding supports in place, but we've also developed the place principle, which some of you may be aware of. It's building on what we learned from the Town Centre First principle and trying to elevate that beyond just towns and say, actually, it's a really good way of working. So it is about asking people to work together, to maximize energy, to maximize resources, and to work really, understand what's happening in places before deciding to make investments, before deciding to locate services, before maybe, building houses, whatever that may be. What is this place about? What's it trying to be? What's it trying to achieve? And before we make an inappropriate investment, how can we actually understand who else is working in that place? What else is going to be happening, so that we can actually make sure that whatever investment is made, it's the appropriate and relevant investment to drive the priorities and ambitions of that place, or at least support it and not work against it. If that's that would be the lowest common denominator, I think. So I guess what I would say is that we have a sound and enabling policy framework for towns in place in Scotland. I mean, that's recognised by other parts of the UK who are adopting some of the things that we've done. The Welsh have adopted the Town Centre First approach. I think in Northern Ireland, they're looking at it. Colleagues in officials, if you like, in UK government are watching what we've done in Scotland and looking to replicate it, although they would never be allowed to say so publicly. And I guess internationally, there's been some recognition of what we're doing in Scotland as well. So what it comes down to is local action. So we've got the enabling framework. I guess the Town Centre review, which I'll touch on briefly, has been looking at this. There's been work around a social renewal advisory board, which was established by my cabinet secretary, Ms. Campbell. And quite a lot of the questions coming out of that work has been, what's stopping this? And in many cases, there's nothing. It's just culture. It's just behaviours. So if that's the case, then how do we actually start to strip away some of those artificial barriers and just crack on with it? So, but it comes down to local action ultimately. And from my experience, where we see that strong partnership, where we see that collaboration, and it's when it's genuine and we see the best results. There's no question. Lots of really inspiring activity, making a real difference in towns and neighbourhoods and rural communities across the country. And you know, that's really where we see that collaboration. It has the best impact. And you know, I've been lucky enough to see some of that just from the funding that we've established and put out there to support people. The Regeneration Capital Grant Fund is a great example of where local authorities, communities work with wider public sector, with the third sector, with private sector, with businesses to bring forward really inspiring projects which are going to be transformative for their places. Likewise, you know, the Town Centre Fund, which we provided to two local authorities a couple of years ago. Some really great things that local authorities are doing, working really closely with communities to develop projects and bring them forward as part of wider ambitions for their places, but really looking at different and creative ways to turn the fortunes around of their towns, not waiting for the traditional, if you like, traditional solutions to come back, but actually driving forward and trying to do things differently. I'll just mention quickly another fund that we were asked to develop and introduce, and it's not all about money, but it is also all about money, during lockdown, and that was the Supporting Communities Fund. When in effect we were asked to get money to communities with as little red tape as quickly as possible to support them, to support you know, vulnerable people and disadvantaged people in their communities. And again, you know, that was challenging, but again, once we worked out the mechanism to do it, the stuff that we saw was absolutely inspirational across the piece. Delighted to be able to enable and support that, I have to say. But again, where was it most powerful? It was the most powerful when it was community-led, but local authorities came in there to support it. Wider public sector, health and social care partnerships came in to support it. The private sector was in there working, and business was working, local businesses to support it. And those partnerships that came together are really powerful, and a lot of them are going to continue to operate post-COVID as well. And I mentioned the Strengthening Communities Fund because that was where I was also able to, with Aileen Campbell's permission, secure some funding to support business improvement districts and to support towns partnerships, and to support the Scotland Loves Local campaign. So £4 million we've been able to carve out for that. Again, really inspiring work that we've seen from business improvement districts, from town centre partnerships and the like, to support local businesses and to support local resilience during the pandemic. Again, so all that core is there, all that experience is there. We know what works. How can we make sure we get behind it and make sure that that is part of the norm going forward? Which brings me on quickly to the Town Centre Action Plan review, which is being chaired by Lee Sparks. We've asked them, we were planning a review of the Town Centre Action Plan anyway, given it was published in 2013. It has been, as I said before, it's been recognised across the UK and internationally. What it wasn't though, it was silent on climate change, and we know that we've got to take strong action there. There was a changed context in Scotland. I mentioned the place principle. The National Performance Framework is there. You know, there's many other things have changed since 2013. So it needed looked at, holding on to the good stuff and trying to fill the gaps of what was missing. And obviously with COVID, that's accelerated our desire to have that review and see what more can be done to help the recovery. But the recovery that we want, I think, is the key thing there too. We're hoping that the review group will give us a report next week. We won't be publishing it straight away, but we will be reflecting on that and considering our response. But yeah, really looking forward to receiving that from the review group. And finally, I'll just mention the place-based investment program, which some of you may or may not have heard of, but that was something that was committed to in our program for government. That was to establish a place-based investment program to link our place-based funding initiatives and seek to ensure a coherent approach to deliver ambitions for our urban and rural places, for our town centres, for our neighbourhoods, and also to look at the concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods, which was also committed to in the programme for government. The programme is designed to make the place principle real to people's lives on the ground. And as I say, we're making good progress in bringing that forward and developing it with a view to starting up. It will evolve over time, but at least starting up by sort of April in 2021 is the plan. That will be matched with £275 million. That's a scary number, over 5 years to support the place-based investment programme. some of that will be going to maintain the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, which has had a very, very positive evaluation and is supporting projects in towns across the country. We still to decide how to allocate a significant chunk of that, but we're hoping that that will tie in local authorities and make them strong partners in what we're trying to do around the place-based investment program. So I'll just finish really by saying that for me, underpinning all of this is collaboration. Underpinning all of this is working together, and we need more of that. It's not a desert. We know that there's lots of good activity happening. Sometimes people approach this as if it's scratch your heads and say we don't know how to do it. We do know how to do it, but we just need to support more of it and make sure that we ask challenging questions when we don't see it happening. And I guess for me, as I said before, the key thing is when everyone's pulling in the same direction to sort of say, how can we work together to make this place better, to make this town centre work? That's when it works better. When we have shared plans, when we have shared visions, not everyone's going to agree within that context, but as I say, if you're all pointing towards the same end goal, I think it's a powerful place to be. And that's how we're going to make our ambitions real in this space. So I'll stop there and thank you very much.
And thank you very much, David. That was really very interesting, and all these different schemes that are available, and delighted to hear from you. In my constituency in Ayr, I think we have some of the best examples of collaboration when it works in Prestwick, but it's not working in Ayr. So any help you can give us subsequently, and me in particular in that regard, I hope maybe we should meet up offline to discuss. However, I would now like to, if I may, having done that, introduce our next speaker, who's Douglas Duff, who's the Acting Director of Development Services at Falkirk Council. And Douglas has had 30 years of experience in planning and regeneration related activity in central Scotland, working as a town planner in Cumbernauld, East Kilbride and Motherwell. He joined South Lanarkshire Council in '96, initially in corporate strategy and subsequently as a regeneration manager responsible for the council's community regeneration and employment programs. So his work involved a huge range of activity in business and regeneration related projects to help deliver the My Futures in Falkirk strategy. So Douglas obviously also has a great deal of experience in this field that we're talking about today. And Douglas, if you are there and ready to go, we're happy to hand over to you, if I may, please. Douglas.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good grief, all that came flooding back to me there when you were reading out that note of my past. Good grief, and actually in the course of that I've built up quite a bit of experience in attempting to regenerate town centres, sometimes successfully, other times less so, but you know, clearly it's an important agenda, and I did read some of what David was pointing towards as a bit of a challenge for how we move this forward. What I'm going to attempt to do is share my screen, share a presentation that I brought, which hopefully is helpful for how I might be able to explain what we're doing in Falkirk. Sorry, I'm struggling to, I'll just run from this if that's okay. I'm struggling to see the share screen option, but just to run through the work that we're doing, which is about collaborating for change. I'd like to think that we've got a lot of that active in Falkirk at the present time. And that relates to what we're doing on an investment zone, which we've been promoting for the Falkirk and Grangemouth area for some time. And that's reflecting the fact that these are communities very much in transition, and that we need to respect that and look to invest in their future. Also to highlight the work we're promoting to revitalise Falkirk's town centres, and pick up on some of the collaborations and partnerships for change that we have in place to move that agenda forward, and the next steps that we plan to allow that to proceed. The work we have on an investment zone really reflects in particular the opportunities and challenges being faced at Grangemouth at the present time. Grangemouth is the foremost part of our economy, and a significant player and contributor to the national economy, with the main ports and refinery complex based there. But significant change taking place in our area as a consequence of major investments coming forward from the industry at Grangemouth. And we see that as a catalyst for change and investment in a number of our key sectors, and the strength of the industrial cluster at Grangemouth that is very much moving forward. In the course of that, it will safeguard a nationally significant site. It can enhance the productivity of the area, the skills and the innovation, which is very much something to the fore in Grangemouth. We've got a very strong partnership. We have an economic partnership that brings together industry, government players, and other institutions to move forward on our economic strategy and on this investment zone proposition. And that's about delivering on national priorities for net zero transition, for resilience, and for economic growth. And we do think that this is a key opportunity for Scotland, particularly at this point in time. There's three main planks of activity to that investment zone proposition. One is about innovative industry and building on the capacity of the chemicals and manufacturing sectors in Grangemouth, and bringing forward a new centre of excellence. There's lots of propositions in moving from carbon-based chemicals activity towards biology-based chemical operations, particularly with industrial biotech, to reuse materials and bring forward new forms of products which will meet future requirements. We also want to promote sustainable transport and build on the Grangemouth's features as an international and national centre of logistics. And we want to also promote the engineering capacities that we have with major manufacturers like Alexander Dennis on our patch. We'll look to bring forward strategic business parks that will help new industrial ventures come forward and new forms of innovation. We have a programme of national economic infrastructure to support the Grangemouth area to operate as a logistics centre, and so upgraded strategic junctions and routes to the port and the chemicals complex, to have greener, smarter networks, particularly in fields like energy and use of digital technologies, and also to integrate and promote smarter travel and increased use of public transport and active travel measures that can assist how movement takes place in our area. Importantly, we want to celebrate the quality of place that we have within our area and the strength of communities, particularly the strength of Falkirk and Grangemouth and the traditions and heritage they have, as well as the scope for innovation. So we want to promote the growth vision that we're establishing through the investment zone. We want to encourage further international tourism. You're all familiar with the Kelpies and Falkirk Wheel now. And so we've seen a significant dent to our visitor numbers over the course of this year. We want to restore that and see prospects for new growth. Importantly, we want to see each of the town centres revitalised and repurposed. The town centres are the heart of these communities, and we need to think about how that has changed as a consequence of COVID in particular, and the kind of changes they've been experiencing over recent years as digital has become the main plank of retail activity. And so we have been promoting a significant range of activities to revitalise our town centres. We've been working on town centre regeneration for probably about 15 years now, and we have a programme that has targeted Falkirk with the development of a Revitalising Falkirk partnership, and we have a particular opportunity to consider how a new council headquarters and art centre coming to the town centre might be a catalyst in repurposing parts of the town centre. In Grangemouth, we've been doing significant community consultation on the longer term options for that centre that may be linked to some of the investment propositions that industry have in Grangemouth. In the town of Bowness, we've been working on regeneration for many years and building on its heritage core with the introduction of the likes of the Hippodrome Cinema, where we can build on its qualities and promote it for the community as well as a visitor location. I don't know how many of you will know Denny, but Denny was in serious condition, you know, back 10, 15 years ago when the blocks, in some cases, it was deemed a mini Cumbernauld. And in the end up, large parts of the town centre had to be demolished and redeveloped, and we've completed the first phase of that. We have a further 2 phases underway that we're marketing to promote at the present time. And Stennismuir, a major growing community in our patch, which has been the subject of a major regeneration scheme and is completed. The work on Falkirk Town Centre is perhaps most pertinent to the discussions that we're having today, where we've been looking pretty fundamentally at what the prospects for Falkirk Town Centre might be. Falkirk was top 10 town centre location back 12 years ago, and it has declined significantly in recent years. And now with the closures of major stores like M&S, BHS, all of these, we've seen its fortunes really dip downwards. So we've established a partnership, revitalising Falkirk, bringing traders, other parts of the community and business together. And we've established a town centre vision, which is that the town centre should be a strong and distinctive place to live, to work and to rest, and genuinely be that heart of the community, a vibrant place for interaction, for people to congregate. And I think the reasons for people to congregate in the future are going to be something that we really have to grapple with. It can be the centre of this economic powerhouse that we have with Grangemouth on its doorstep. We've had diverse ranges of uses, with culture being at the heart of that and reasserting its value to the community. That can help to attract people and business back, take advantage of the heritage features of Falkirk, which we've invested in through a Townscape Heritage Initiative. And importantly, in the vision, community ownership and inclusion were seen as vital and non-negotiable as far as how we proceed. So we have a town centre action plan. The partnership put together the action plan with a set, a strong governance model to manage that process, to communicate its intent, build a brand around it, and celebrate the successes. We aim to create some, hubs of activity, reinvigorate the retail activity that does take place in town centre, promote new residential opportunities, some of which have come through the likes of our Townscape Heritage work, and enhance the infrastructure core to the centre so that it allows more opportunity for people to access, etc. We've had some early wins. We will have some meanwhile activities. This was very much a feature that we want to make sure that whilst bigger plans come forward, we have things happening that show progress, and we will have the longer term measures which we hope will make a difference. And we've allocated out the responsibilities and the resources accordingly. I mentioned our council headquarters and arts centre facility, and this is where the council's been looking at what its future needs should look like and to replace its current facility. And we want to see that as an opportunity for the council and partners to have a base for modern and flexible working, to have an arts centre component to it, which will replace our existing town hall facility, but will be very much a new and distinctive feature with a range of performance spaces, creative spaces, a library, that with the office and the other working and learning activities can very much be a vibrant facility. It will have daytime and evening operations, various events taking place around it, the opportunity to share spaces with a range of partners, and really act as a catalyst to help transform from a retail focus towards a working learning and leisure destination across the town centre. And some visuals we have here show the range of activities that could be comprised in that facility and that will operate as a frontline delivery hub. We see the benefits that come from
drawing
this.
to a close, Douglas. Your sort of 10 minutes is.
Yeah, I'm nearly there. So a number of benefits that we will see from that in economic regeneration, the cultural offer and customer service. Did want to mention the capital fund. It's been great, David, and I've got a list going off the bottom of the slide here of all the various measures we've promoted for that. We've also done the Falkirk Loves Local campaign. We've been full and active participants in that and greatly received by traders and the wider community. So very much keen to see that proceed. We've introduced a new gift card for all of our town centres, which has seen some real interest from retailers and the wider community. So, and finally, our next steps. I think what we do recognise is this is a critical point in time for our communities and important that the decisions made now set us on the right path. We have our investment zone, which is with the UK and Scottish Government just now to resolve how we take it forward. And the town centre programmes are central to that. What we recognise is that place-based interventions are key for us to a greener, more inclusive and vibrant future, and particularly coming from the experience we've had with COVID. And that collaboration with partners, including our communities, is vital to that change. Thanks very much, Chair, and apologies for running over.
Not at all. It was absolutely fascinating. And you will see in the chat box for yourself how much everyone has enjoyed your presentation. And I think what singles it out is how much you've achieved, or at least apparently achieved from the perspective of this screen. But thank you very much indeed for that presentation, Douglas. I certainly enjoyed it, and I think I speak for everyone in that regard. Which now takes us on to our next speaker, Alan Anthony, who's the Scottish Chair of RAVO and CEO of 360 Architecture. And Alan founded the practice and is responsible for the strategic direction of the business, and he devotes much of his time to project inception, concept development and design review. He has a particular passion for vision-led regeneration and reinvention of urban centres, and this sits well with his current position as Scottish Chair of RAVO. So, Alan, if you'd be kind enough to give us your presentation, around 10 minutes, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about some of the recent positive activity that we've been involved in. I'm going to start off with a brief summary of the Paisley Vision pilot project, and then I will argue about its positive outcomes to date, and then I will also touch on the potential of our failing shopping centres to be catalysts for town centre regeneration, which has been a matter for 2 STP DWF summits in Edinburgh over the last 2 years. So I'll try and share screen now. Let me know if that's successful.
Yep, appears to be.
Okay, thank you. We'll go full screen. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. The Paisley Vision Project. Renfrewshire Council launched this last year at this time, and it's a Scottish Government pilot project, and it's an excellent example of collaboration across public, private and community sectors. And both Bill and David and many people attending have been involved in the creation of this pilot project. In these sessions, I think it's always important to ponder and remember why it's important. Why are we bothering? Why do we care? You know, I think many of us believe that the health of our communities is intrinsically tied to and reflected in the health of our town centres. And I think the current pandemic has made that even clearer, and it's accelerated the need for our centres to adapt. What happened to Paisley High Street? Same as happened to most high streets in Scotland. changing retail behaviour in favour of online, out of town, and the most damaging of all, edge of town retail parks. Paisley was chosen as a pilot study because it's the largest town in Scotland, and as a post-industrial market town has the greatest potential for learnings. This is what we inherited. We examined Paisley in 3 dimensions and noted the high vacancy rate, and it was growing, and since then M&S have announced they will desert the high street to move to an edge of town retail park after 80 years of being there in the Arcadia group. We need to see what comes out of that and its effect. We're not going back to the golden days of a retail dominated high street in the 70s and 80s, we all know that. We might best look at the pre-60s situation, compact and accessible for low car ownership society, but fundamentally mixed use, and that's where we need to get back to. There will be retail, but the best way we can support that retail is by making the town centre busy with the other uses. The whole focus of the vision was on community and engaging the whole community in the town centre. Positioning what we call attractors where they would stimulate footfall and energise the town. And these attractors could be a cinema, a library, a market, a medical centre. And the key mindset shift that we all need to make sure that we adopt is, let's not put them where it's convenient and available and appears to be the cheapest. Let's put them where they're most valuable and create benefit for the wider community. It was important in the vision that we had to place the community inside the story. So it's a highly visual document, and you can download it from the link that Elaine will send around. Key aspect of the vision is the Paisley Centre, pretty much taking up the whole of that triangle in the centre, the majority of it. Down at Hill Shopping Centre, it has 45% of the retail space in the whole town, and it's under single ownership and of a scale that can turn the town around. And this is a recurring theme in this presentation. This is shown as a mixed use quarter, residential led, with retail placed on the street edges where it can activate the town rather than buried deep in the block. These are some slides out of the document. This shows where we bring a church onto the high street that we didn't know was there. So it's a shift in physical perception, and also handily creates some development frontage for residential, but it changes how you move through the town, how you perceive the town. The high street, another sunny day in Paisley. This is about making space into place while repairing and inhabiting the centre. This is about saving the valuable assets such as a Liberal Club, like putting uses in there and investing in there. Might be more difficult, but it's more valuable. This is the provocative scenario to put the university where the Paisley Centre is, and a much better solution than happened in Hamilton, where they moved it out to out of town business park. So why do we need a vision? There's some words there, but I think it's important to know that the vision is not a picture of what will happen. It's a vision of what type of things need to happen. It's the glue that impacts every future decision and galvanises the public, private and community together under shared purpose, a purpose that's appropriate and relevant. Out of this vision for Paisley came the government guidance for high street regeneration, which has a step-by-step methodology to develop a vision for your town. It has a manifesto of 22 points, which we've since cut down to 18. And you'll see this, the slides will be shared if you're interested, and the document available. So a few other projects across the UK which apply the principles of this. This one's in Greater Manchester, 2 shopping centres, private sector and local authority in collaboration to create 800 new homes, new civic space, consolidated retail around the edges with a public funded health and leisure centre in the heart. So re-energising the heart of the town. Ayr Town Centre, you mentioned Ayr. On the right, we've got the Kyle Centre repurposed as cinema, urban cinema. And on the left, the Arran Centre, and the plans are to put a health and leisure centre there also. This is the edge of London, where you could add a 0 onto the values, of course, but it's still the same principle. Repopulate the high street, consolidate retail, and create quality civic space in this instance giving home to historic market. So what's the Paisley vision achieved? We're 1 year down. This is the cinema pages out of the vision document, and it proposes the cinema where it has the most regenerative impact and where it could repair the streetscape, where you see the building in the bottom left, and where it, drive footfall where it matters to energise other businesses. I'm happy to say the Paisley Community Trust have now signed a partnership agreement with Renfrewshire Council to deliver a community-owned cinema and digital skills academy in this location, and they have received initial funding from the council and Screen Scotland. It's an exemplar community empowerment and wealth building project and collaboration between the council and the community. Emma's speaking later, but this is one of Emma's centres, the Jewel in her Crown, I'd imagine. It's the Piazza Centre in Paisley, the other shopping centre. And whereas New River are obviously looking at repurposing large assets across the UK, the Paisley Vision process has encouraged Emma to talk to us and engage with the council on the future of this shopping centre to consolidate retail, introduce residential, and potentially reopen the river over the construction in the 60s. Health on the High Street. This document was published by NHS and it's for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it recognises the benefits of locating services in the town centre and the responsibility to do so. So it's critical that we in Scotland keep fighting to ensure that when public money is spent, it prioritises the town centre. And in Paisley, we're encouraged to hear that the town centre vision has influenced Renfrewshire Council in negotiations with NHS to locate a large NHS asset in the town centre. Finally, the biggest positive outcome is that the Paisley Centre has now been sold, and the purchaser has stated the published vision prompted this decision, and he has had positive engagement with the council and the community trust, which has encouraged him as well. And he now intends to implement a phased redevelopment along the lines of the mixed-use proposals in the Paisley vision. So I think we can be optimistic about the future, but it's going to take a bit of work and a bit of time. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Alan. That was absolutely great. Again, I think, am I unmuted now? Thanks again, Alan. I just would absolutely identify, and I noticed there's a comment in the chat box, new framing needing to address climate adaptation and resilience to the impact of extreme climate events. And that's certainly something that I feel needs to be addressed much more than possibly is being thought about is sea level rise and coastal inundation. But anyway, a huge amount of stuff to think about there in what you're talking about in Paisley. Really interesting, and I'm also pleased to hear that you're part of helping the Ear into a better place. I'd now like to, if I may, just move on to the next speaker, who's Emma McKenzie, who's the Head of Asset Management and Director of New River. She's a member of the Executive Committee and Head of Asset Management. Emma has overarching responsibility for the financial and operational performance of the retail portfolio throughout the UK. Emma's responsibilities also include oversight of New River's property management, rent collection, and the company's environmental, social and governance programme. So, Emma, you've got over 20 years of experience in the retail property market, and I dare say you've got a huge amount of things to say. So if you would like to fire off, please. Very good to see you on the screen for the first time. Would you just like to go ahead now, please, Emma?
Lovely. Thank you very much, John, and thank you to Phil and Scottish Towns Partnership for allowing me to join you this afternoon. It's a great opportunity to meet you all, albeit not face to face. But so thank you to everybody. I'm sure recently New River just signed up to be one of the sponsors of the Scotland Loves Local campaign, because we're great advocates of communities and town centres, and being a Scot myself, although I'm in London regularly, and particularly Paisley is close to my heart because that's where I went to university some time ago. So it's very much it's nice to be part of the session this afternoon. So I'll just share my screen with you and just right to get there. There we go. So
That's you.
that's me there. So I'll just take you through the presentation this afternoon, which I think it's what's very apparent. One of the few positives that have come out of what is has been a horrendous situation of a global pandemic is that the recognition that people, where there is a will and a way, people can really work together and come together to make really positive things happen. And you just have to look at the speed that the Nightingale hospitals were delivered at to recognise that what can be achieved between people, businesses and sectors is phenomenal, where there's a real collaboration and a will to make things happen. So I'll just explain very briefly who New River are and a little bit about the retail market and the vacancy in town centres, which is why we are where we are. And it's not something that's happened in the last 9 months, but it's been an increasing issue for a number of years. And also what that means for the public sector and the private sector in relation to where we go, how we go forward and work collaboratively, and what successful regeneration can look like and how we can measure that. So just a little bit of background about New River. We are a listed business. We're a real estate investment trust, and we were founded about 11 years ago. We came out of the last financial crisis and we bought largely distressed assets in distressed towns and invested heavily in them, both with time and capital to turn that round. We've rebased a lot of rents obviously since then. But even in that period, I'm sure you can appreciate retail has changed significantly in the last 10 or 11 years. But throughout that process, we worked very collaboratively with our retailers, and we've got very strong relationships with them. And actually, as a retail business, where rent collection has been absolutely the top of the agenda for most retail businesses, collecting rent has been extremely challenging over the last kind of 6 and 9 months. But New River have done a remarkable job really in collecting on our Q1 rents, which was the April quarter and the June quarter. We're kind of mid-90s on the rents that we've collected, and actually is not just is reflective of what's been achieved in the last 6 or 9 months, but it's related to the relationships we have with those individuals and understanding their businesses long before any of this happened. So we do work very closely with our retailers and with all the local authorities. We're invested. We've got assets up and down the whole of the United Kingdom, so we're engaged with over 60 councils up and down the country. So we've got great working relationships with the councils in the towns that we invest in. We do also a bit of third-party asset management for other parties. Some councils we look after some assets for them, and because we're obviously a listed business, we're very thoroughly regulated, and we've had to be very transparent with all the governance, and also our commitment to ESG is very high on our agenda, and certainly climate change is one a huge point of focus for the whole real estate industry going forward, and it's a very significant part to play in it. And also on the social side, what the property industry deliver on the social aspects and investing in their towns is very important, and it's coming far more topical and visible as the years have gone on. So just a little bit about what we do. I mean, as I said, we're invested in town centres up and down the country. We don't have any exposure to department stores, very limited exposure to mid-market fashion, thankfully. And we also don't have any sort of regional out of town large destination shopping centres, the likes of Silverburn, etc. So we're pretty much town centre focused. And that's the kind of list there. I'll not read them all out. It's who our largest retailers are. So we're heavily exposed to value and convenience and retailers that do not have a strong online presence, and that they're very much focused in town centres, and that's how their whole business model operates. And although online has grown, and we've seen a rapid growth of it in the last 6 or 9 months, before this time last year, online sales attributed for about 21% of all sales. It reached a peak of about 33% in May of this year, and it's fallen back to about 28%. So that's still, even despite all that's gone on, 7 out of 10 purchases are still being made in the high street. So it is not by any means the death of retail as we know it in high streets. We are all social beings, And what, again, has been very visible over the last year is that people want to be with people, they want to connect, and they want to be in their town centres. And certainly our footfalls have outperformed the national averages because people, for all the right reasons, have had to stay locally and have shopped locally. And I think one of the most apparent things of that is that there's been a positive experience in the main, that people have actually enjoyed reacquainting themselves with their local towns, and also they've recognised that there's a responsibility to do that, that to support the local businesses and your town, you have to use your local town, and that's been a positive thing for people, that by putting something in, they've got something back. So just to give you a little bit of background just on why this oversupply issue's happened, it's not something new. As I said, it's been going on for years, and you can look back over the last 20 years, retail vacancy has continued to rise, and that's just over the various sectors, apart from supermarkets, which is along the bottom there. The other lines of retail, warehousing, vacancy had declined, and then it's just increased slightly over the last couple of years, but high streets and shopping centres has very much, trended upwards over the last 20 years. And when you look at the rise of online during that period, it's continued to rise as such. That's the peak in earlier this year, but also that's the floor space. So despite the increase in vacancy over the last 20 years, we've continued to build space, and we've built space and built space and built space to a level where the vacancy is still growing, and that's largely a lot of out-of-town space that's been built over the last 20 years, and that's what's caused the issues. And you can see along the bottom line here, that's the rental growth line. So rental growth has just declined as the vacancy has increased and the amount of floor space available has increased. And what that's resulted in for the property industry is that the returns from retail property have declined. And when you can see, that's the all property line there, that deep blue line, retail, office and industrial. So it's cyclical, as you can see, but it's declined, and retail has dipped more than most, and the differential between all property sectors and retail has continued to increase, and that's what's caused the issue for the private sector, and that whole dislocation is what's caused an issue. And if there are opportunities in that, and there's a lot of opportunity just now in retail and in real estate generally. And there's a lot of money circulating to buy property just now. But what's challenging with retail is the availability of funding. So if the private sector are to seek funding to actually buy into retail property just now, the major clearing banks it's very, very challenging to get funding from the major clearing bank for retail investment. It's also very challenging for us as a listed business to go out and do an equity capital raise. So those reasons are why, for the private sector left to their own devices to try and effect really meaningful change with the oversupply issue, it's just going to take far, far too long. It will come back because values will hit a level that people will buy in at again, and it will continue, it will rise on the back of that. But right now, in this point of time, that there's an opportunity for change, and what the last year has done has accelerated what was happening anyway, and actually shone a light on what the opportunity is, and it has to be addressed sooner rather than later. So what it does need, though, is the experience to price in risk and to understand what those risks are, to have the relationships with the retailers and also the alternative uses, and look at what opportunities exist with that oversupply to bring in other uses into a town centre, which will drive footfall and continue to support the various occupiers and that people that live in those towns and why they want to live and work in those towns. So the wider influences, along with the vacancy issue, is the ageing population, the constant drive for new housing, the environmental aspects, which we've touched on earlier, the use of technology and how people live, work and shop, and also from the influences of the last 9 months from COVID, obviously. So that's exactly what's happened, as I've explained. There's just confidence gets impacted. Retail continues to decline. It's difficult to attract capital investment, and then the town continues to just decline, and so it goes on. And that's why the intervention is required, confident intervention between public and private partnerships, bringing together the knowledge and the wider exposure that the public sector have to all the components of a town centre, and that's be it residential, medical, leisure, all our access and ability to reduce costs, working collaboratively, the civic units, and also the whole sustainability of it becomes much more cyclical when there's profit and purpose involved. That there's an income stream for businesses out of this, but there's also a purpose behind it. And that there's an emphasis on working collaboratively to achieve both, and that very much can be achieved. So the measuring of social value is one thing that's, again, it's becoming of increasing focus, looking at where we are and where we're to get to. And again, these are just some of the components that you would look at, again, which with the public sector have far greater access to than the private sector, to measure where we are and where we want to get to, and actually kind of charting that pathway together to see some real meaningful progress in many of these areas, working collaboratively. And I'll not go through all these, I'm just conscious of time, but these couple of slides, or I think the presentations will be circulated, are just a couple of examples of where we've worked with councils to deliver facilities to towns in where we've got ownership. Down the northeast of England, we did a wonderful library facility with North Tyneside Council. And in Wakefield, we've repurposed just 3 large units there to put a cinema into a shopping centre. And we've also delivered food back into to Wallsend with Aldi coming in. And again, just some of our third-party mandates that the councils that we work with and private equity that we're working with as well on a third-party basis. So just to summarise that, we can all acknowledge that retail is changing. Fashion particularly has gone online. That will not change. Fashion will continue to be a move to online, but there are many uses and services which will not be able to go online, and many retailers that can manage to do both. And that omni-channel success, the likes of Next, for example, that can operate very successfully and absolutely require their high street presence to support their online business, will continue to be the themes going forward. That people have changed the way they want to live and shop, and the working patterns and working from home, I think, is a pattern that here is to stay, and that's a positive thing for our town centres, that people will use their town centres more regularly. But there are challenges around all the repurposing of the space, and that's where working with them in partnerships and the piece done with 360 on Paisley and working with the council, Throne Fisher Council, is looking at how we achieve that and getting a wider plan in place and looking at the smaller components of that will affect some change. And certainly that the document on Paisley certainly has allowed us to just further progress our own thought process on repurposing some of the excess retail space that we have in Paisley, to try and work with the council to try and deliver some of that in time. So it's looking at how Scottish governments can support both councils and the private sector in trying to deliver some of these changes. And certainly it's an education piece on both sides and a building up of trust on both sides for us all to work more collaboratively and with an open book basis as to understand what are the drivers from both sides to try and affect some of the change. Because I genuinely believe that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and right here and now is probably the best time to try and grab some of this and move forward together.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma, for that analytical analysis of retail in towns. I'm particularly and unhappily struck by your vicious downward spiral graph and the need for, but therefore the need for public and private collaboration. What worries me is who carries the risk in all this. I suspect is it always the private sector, or is it sometimes the public sector? But anyway, absolutely fascinating. And once again, you talk about the need for partnership working, which has been an abiding and constant theme throughout this day. So I now want to move to questions after my grateful thanks to all the speakers, but you're now going to be interrogated. And I have, I believe, a question here from David Cowan, Kim Fellows, who would be interested to hear how councils can continue to take on the challenging agenda, the regeneration agenda as outlined by David Cowan, as both leaders and funders in the face of pressure on local government funding. I suppose that would be a question for David, please, if you'd like to answer it. But if others want to come in too, people like Douglas have obviously managed to get there. Funding's always been short, but the amount that Douglas has achieved is phenomenal. So anyway, first of all, to David, please.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I would emphasize is that our approach to regeneration whether town centre regeneration or other types of regeneration, is very much been community led, but very much in partnership with local government. This is not a Scottish government initiative. This is something that we've developed together and that we work in partnership together. And so I think, councils, in my view, many councils continue to prioritise regeneration, place and town centres. So all I would say is that we've got the review of the Town Centre Action Plan. COSLA are a part of that. We're very keen that whatever comes out of the review is something that Scottish Government and local government sign up to together to take that forward. I recognise that funding is pressured. I mentioned the place-based investment programme. We have announced in the programme for government that will be backed up by £275 million worth of funding over 5 years. You could say that that's a large amount, but equally it's a very small amount in the context of what we're facing here. But that will be a continuation of the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, which we do deliver in partnership with local authorities. As I said before, that's had a pretty positive evaluation, and I think that will be important, an important fund in continuing to support the kind of stuff we're talking about: repurposing buildings, reimagining places, what are the opportunities for doing things differently, and the like. Equally, we've still to determine how some of that funding will be allocated, but as I suggested earlier, we're keen to make sure that we think about how we channel some of that money through local authorities, so that they can help support the town centre activity that we're talking about here, and for those authorities that maybe don't have towns, looking at neighbourhoods, rural communities and the like. So we've only had a very initial conversations with COSLA, but we're going to progress that now. We've kind of got the green light to carry on that conversation. So a conversation about how we can continue to support local authorities and how they can use that money, if you like, once we've agreed some terms and conditions, which will be light, but just how we can use that money to leverage private sector investment, other kinds of investment as well. And then just finally, I'll finish on saying that colleagues in the economy directorate are developing a capital investment strategy at the moment, or a capital investment plan. And part of that conversation is very much about now looking about how we can how that plan could support taking on some of the distressed assets we're going to see in town centres that Emma's been talking about, and others, and see if there's opportunities there. Again, how we can use that money sensibly to transform town centres. So I think there's opportunities there. I recognise that there's challenges across the piece on budgets and resource, but people don't generally say we don't care about our town centres. So hopefully local authorities will continue to prioritise them as well.
Thanks very much, David. That was really helpful. Douglas, I don't know, do you want to come in on that as well? You probably don't have any distressed assets left in Falkirk, given the success of what you've done, but maybe you'd like to answer the question as well, if you would, please.
I'm worried that perhaps I've given the wrong impression with what I've presented today, and that if anybody goes and speaks to people in Falkirk and has a sense that we've had a huge success in this, they would very quickly be disavowed of that. The Falkirk's town centres are, really struggling, and, akin to everyone up and down the country, people have a real concern about how they do move forward. And, therefore, this is hard. This is really hard, and we have to face up to that and think how we can move it forward. I think all the steps that have been taken to prioritise town centres, the town centre first, and I think the place principle will really help to reinforce this and emphasise that town centres are the heart of a community. But I'm struck by what Alan mentioned about the contrast of what's the most valuable as against the cheapest. I've had that very specific conversation. There's always a cheaper and simpler option to do something, but it may not be the most valued and to the community and to the interests longer term. And I think that's a real challenge with this, particularly as we move forward, given the state of distressed assets in town centres. I would be hoping that the coin's going to drop, for instance, in net zero terms, about the embedded carbon that we have in our town centres, and how the reuse of those properties makes good carbon sense. And ultimately that we need to look at the fact that there are jobs here, and the jobs are critical to our communities. And so reinforcing the value of town centres and helping to sustain jobs, and that the activities there help to sustain their communities is fundamental. So I would say this is hugely challenging for councils, given the austerity and so on, both in revenue budget and capital budget. It's not at all easy, and therefore building a good and positive case for this has to be vital. We're having a similar session to this tomorrow with our council members, where we're going to be speaking about this, and we are going to have to convince them that they have to be brave and think about the next wave of interventions that are required.
Thanks very much, Douglas. I appreciate that. I think you've almost answered the question that was there from Dennis Rodwell about how inclusive is your concept of cultural offer. If you want to say a few words on that, a very few words on that, because we've got more questions and we haven't got much time.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've been doing a lot to involve people. Clearly, it's difficult to involve people just now with the pandemic, but we have been doing a lot to get around communities and talk about how we move this forward. We are going to be doing more of that. And part of it is just the need to galvanise people's ideas and thoughts around this, particularly in the cultural sector. The cultural sector can be a bit frail and, flighty. And actually having some consolidation around what it can contribute. And I think post-pandemic, there is a point about why do people need to get together? Why do they need to congregate? And what will bring them together in real and positive experiences? And the cultural sector has to answer that question and give solutions for our different towns. We've got a specific challenge there because we need to replace our cultural asset, our town hall, and create something that's fit for the next century. And therefore, we're asking and want to ask that our cultural community what that should look like and how it can be used to repurpose the heart of the town.
Okay, really many thanks, Douglas. I'm sorry to rush you. Just move on to the next question from, it's for Emma, and it's from Dennis Rodwell. And what do you see as the role of the planning? What do you see as the role of the planning system to avoid misinvestment and oversupply? Emma, if you're still with us and would like to comment on that, the role of the planning system.
Well, it's very important that the existing town centre first approach is adopted. If there is a desire for more space to be created, it has to be very, very carefully considered in light of what space we've got and what the oversupply issue is within a town centre. And so creating space, and what's been problematic in the last few years, and there are still legacy consents which have been granted in the last few years, which haven't been built out, and which may be built out in the coming years, will have negative impacts on town centres. But from going forward, having a town centre first approach and the planning system very much supporting that and limiting what additional space is built, particularly for retail, I think has to be the kind of priority for the planning system to control that. But it's also allowing and supporting flexibility and change and adopting alternative uses and the different uses of buildings to be able to be flexible and people to be able to use buildings for different uses, etc. And I think that supports a nimble approach to entrepreneurship, and particularly at a local level, because it's all very well the private sector coming in and trying to affect change. It has to come from the grassroots up in terms of the use of space in towns. And that kind of whole local piece is very fundamental in informing planning decisions.
Right, thank you. Moving swiftly on, I've got another question from Andy Mosley, and I'm going to go to Alan Anthony with this one, because Alan, you haven't had a chance to respond to any questions. But the question is, social housing and affordable housing are important for making town centre places that can provide homes for everyone. How can we ensure that this is built into town centre regeneration so that all people can live and work there. Alan, if you'd like to have a go at that one,
Yeah.
and others as well subsequently if you want.
That's absolutely bang on. All the proposals, apart from perhaps the one on the edge of London that we had shown you earlier, and the Paisley one, they all are hinged on a collaboration with a social housing landlord. Some identified, some not yet. And this is the opportunity to, it's seen as the opportunity to fix the gap in the market, which for affordable housing for entry-level residents as well, and particularly for the ageing population, to support them in the landscape that they've known all their life in the centre of town where they can access all the facilities.
Okay, thanks very much. Does anyone else want to respond to that question? If you do, I'll just jump in.
Yeah, I'll come in if that's okay, John.
Great.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I see that Malcolm Fraser's on the call, so he will know that town centre living was one of the main sort of themes, if you like, in the town centre review and the subsequent town centre action plan. And I would say that that's probably an area that we would like to see more progress. We did have a town centre fund briefly, but it proved challenging to actually use that fund in a way to get it into town centres. And we do recognise that there's sometimes an additional cost, particularly if you're repurposing buildings in town centres. So totally accept that housing, town centre living and housing where it's appropriate is absolutely something that we want to get behind. There's an opportunity here with Housing 2040, I think, which the government has been consulting on, and certainly a strong message came out about town centre living and place and community in that too. So we're working with housing colleagues on that right now to see what the opportunities are. But again, I mentioned, town centre funding and potential place-based investment coming forward. Some local authorities use that town centre funding that was provided previously, use their share to create housing in, say, an old hotel and the like and stuff like that. So there's really good examples of where it can happen, but absolutely we need to accelerate the pace of that if we're serious about town centres and 20-minute neighbourhoods.
Okay, that's very good. Is there anybody else want to comment on that, or we move to the next question? We're pretty well running out of time, actually. But so maybe I won't ask any other question, ask people to answer any more on that regard, and I'll ask a final question for David Cowan or Douglas Duff from Ed Archer. And what do you think is the best way of working with the general public and the retail sector, as councils, development trusts and community trusts often have quite different perspectives about what they want to see done? And if any of you are looking at the chat, you'll see that's also coming up in the chat just now. So Douglas, would you like, first of all, to talk about that? And I mean, David, would you like to talk about that first, and then Douglas thereafter, and after that, if anyone else wants to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I touched on it when I spoke earlier, but where things happen most effectively, in my view, is where there's a shared vision and a shared ambition for a place. Now, it can be tricky to get there. I totally get that there's difference of opinions between a local authority sometimes and a community or a CPP and the like. And I suppose I've talked about it quite often. Is in this job I've quite often seen a community action plan which is developed by a small portion of the community, which runs totally counter. So the communities are doing things despite the local authority or the CPP, and vice versa. And that we don't have the luxury of investing in that anymore, actually investing in projects and proposals that aren't contributing to the greater sort of whole, if you like. And that's really what's behind the place principle. So I think people need to enter into discussions about plans for a place, whether it's using a place standard or a charrette or various other methods, but you have to iron these differences out before you start looking for funding, I think, to make things happen. So personally, from my point of view, the experience we've had with the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund is we very much try to look and support those projects where you've got evidence and you can see that everybody's on board, more or less everybody, I guess you would say, and that you can see how it contributes to the wider ambitions for that place, as opposed to a project, which could be a nice project, but with the limits on grant funding that are out there, I don't think we have the luxury to support those things anymore. And we just need to actually start talking to each other and work through the issues to get to the point where we can all get behind something. You can still have disagreements within that, but we still need to be working towards the same, broadly the same outcome.
A brilliant response, David. Absolutely, there speaks the voice of reason, I would say. Douglas, do you want to say anything as well? Sorry for cutting off before.
Yeah, I would say we need lots of voices of reason. I think that would be really helpful, and you know, that form of collaboration that is vital. And what would really help is to make sure that there's continuity. I think it's important not to, you know, get a community warmed up about something and, you know, keen to see things happen and then drop it off again. And actually there are concerns that are arising from the pandemic. Some of the momentum that was built up prior to then, it has dropped off and it needs to be rekindled. We're having discussions with our communities to that effect, because it's important to build trust. You know, it's important to have trust with them that when you say you'll do something, you'll get it done, it'll be delivered, and you'll see the successes of that. I think to have continuity of funding would really help. I know how hard it has been for David to get these funds established, but they have been vital, and, you know, really it would be fantastic to see that those town centre funds, the regeneration funds, there over the course of several years with a line of sight about how they can be used towards these kinds of programmes. So, you know, I would say it's important to know you're in there for the long term, build up the relationships, build up the capacity of people to get involved, and make sure that you're able to deliver.
Right, thank you very much. Do any of the other speakers want to comment on that or not? Because we've lots of other questions. It's always the same at the end of the meeting, everyone piles in with questions. Right, I'm not giving you much opportunity, but what I'm going to do is just go to another question from Dennis Rodwell. Should planning consents be granted for new buildings if there are vacant existing buildings in town centres? And then there's a general question from David Lonsdale. Lots of great medium and long-term thinking and proposals, but do the panel have any thoughts on more immediate interventions that can be taken over the next few months or in the Scottish budget, as some shops, eateries and other businesses may not exist this time next year? David and Douglas, you've had a fair kick at the ball just recently. I'll go to Alan first, and perhaps Emma, if she wants thereafter, and come back to you on those two questions. Alan, would you like to go to this one, please? Or not?
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat the specific question? Sorry.
Sorry. Should planning consents be granted for new buildings if there are vacant existing buildings in town centres? I suppose that means should they be repurposed first? And the other question was from David Lonsdale about the medium to long term thinking is fine, but what are we going to do in the short term, as a lot of businesses are going to be out of business soon rather than in the medium or the long term?
Yeah, well, on the planning question, I would love it if they could presume to retain the heritage we have in some of our townscapes. I think it's unlikely to have a legal construct where that you can affect that. But this is why, and David mentioned it before, that we constantly champion the idea of a vision, and the vision should be a relevant document in determining the application. Does this proposal and with the vision, does it, and if the vision is most likely saying let's retain our heritage and protect it for future generations, then I think that it could be encouraged in that way.
Right. Okay. Does Emma want to say anything on planning and the long-term thoughts or not?
I'll just, sorry, Emma, sorry.
Emma, you want to have...
Yeah, I would just add that obviously it's so granular, that sort of question, isn't it? It very much depends on which building and which use. But I think it's very apparent that lots of different uses now can be accommodated in all sorts of different buildings. So I certainly think that should be the starting point, is whether a building can be repurposed, if it's a building you want to keep, and what it adds to the community. So it should be part of the process of any kind of change of uses, looking at what we've got and can we do it better, and does it add to the amenity of the town in its present condition and location.
Thanks, Emma. A final word from David or Douglas, because this is the end.
Sorry, I was just going to say on the repurposing of buildings. I mean, firstly, National Planning Framework 4 position statement, I'm sure you've all read it, was published last week, which sort of sets out an approach to reusing and repurposing and town centres. Equally, the infrastructure investment plan, which is currently out for consultation, is proposing a hierarchy for investment. So actually, new build would be the bottom of the list of the hierarchy. So if you haven't sort of responded to that yet, I would encourage you to look at that and see if you want to respond. But that's certainly the direction that we're trying to move in. And I think the climate challenge, which has been mentioned several times today, would push us in that direction as well. Clearly, old buildings aren't necessarily the ones that are going to fix all of our problems, but there's ways that you can repurpose it to help that. So I think, would I say that the planning system should presume that? I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're moving into that territory, certainly. And you know, I think it would be certainly a welcome thing from a town centre regeneration perspective.
Good, thank you.
Can I maybe add, John?
Yes, go on.
Just I should have said during my presentation, but our area has got the highest amount of carbon emissions in Scotland. There's about 4 million tonnes of carbon emitted from Grangemouth each year, and therefore we've got a real challenge with achieving net zero, which we are working on. And I've mentioned the embedded carbon that we have in our buildings and town centres, that I think will be an increasingly important feature to this. It's hard, you know, it's hard to look at how to utilise those buildings, but we've been working with the Scottish Futures Trust on looking at net zero as an opportunity to reuse buildings and to create better carbon solutions. So I think it is fundamental, and it will be an important driver to help to reuse properties in town centres.
Right, that's absolutely fantastic. I want to conclude this part of the meeting at any rate by thanking all our speakers. We've had brilliant presentations from David, Douglas, Alan and Emma, and we could go on all afternoon because there's a huge opportunity in this forum really for interactive learning. My takeaway from all of this is that we want to move forward in the regeneration of town centres, and I hope it's shared by all of us, but it is, I think it was David that said we have to have a shared vision before you start. Otherwise you don't get started. It seems to be my experience, and I know in my constituency of here that the Prestwick shared vision was there for a long time, and it's been a huge success. And I'm pleased to see that also Falkirk particularly have that too. So my grateful thanks on behalf of all of the participants, of whom there were over 100 on this call today, to our speakers who have been inspirational really, and of course to Elaine and Phil and Alison for grabbing these speakers to come and speak to us today. So move on to the final part of the meeting, which is any other competent business. I don't know if there is any other competent business. Phil, you might want to say something if you're still with us, if there is or not. If I don't hear from you, I'll close the meeting. Phil.
Nothing to add. Elaine might want to mention the date of the next meeting.
That would, or I could do that since it's in front of me, and thank you for drawing it to my attention, which is Wednesday, the 10th of March at 1 o'clock till 2:30, the same place, same time, but on Wednesday, the 10th of March. And so with that, do keep in touch with Scotland Towns Partnership. If you have any residual questions from this afternoon, the presentations will all be put up on the website. And my thanks to you all for your attendance today and the lessons that we have taken away from the presentations. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.